All philosophies and religions seem to search for the ultimate real truth. Although ancient Buddhist thought and European existentialism share the deep-rooted desire to journey toward truth, the geographic and historic disparities between the two modes of thought lead many to assume truth is their only bond. Originating in India 3,000 miles away from the European existentialists, Buddhism seems far removed from any form of 19th century European thought. However, Keiichi Nishitani, a dual student of Buddhist thought and German existentialism, innovatively ties together the seemingly oppositional patterns of thought through his comparison of Eastern and Western philosophies. As we delve into our comparison of existentialists Soren Kierkegaard and Friedrich Nietzsche, along with Nishitani, we will examine each man's contention of the ultimate truth. The existentialist conception of a singular ultimate truth varies greatly from the Buddhist encompassing view. Kierkegaard believes that historical presuppositions, mechanistic citizens, religious institutions, and so-called sacred doctrines all contribute to the false illusion of truth generated by the crowd. Knowledge without inward reflection and without intimacy with the divine cannot foster understanding. Mere knowledge derived from religious doctrines or historical documents cannot, therefore, lead to understanding of real truth. In Kierkegaard's text, Preparation for a Christian Life, he illustrated these truth-seeking elements by answering his own question: can one, from history, learn to know anything about Christ?
No, and why not? Because one cannot know anything about Christ, for he is the paradox, the object of faith, and exists only for faith. Whether now one learn little or much about him, it will not represent what he was in reality. Hence one learns something else about him than what is strictly true, and therefore learns nothing about him, or gets to know something wrong about him. That is, one is deceived. History makes Christ look different from what he looked in truth. About Christ nothing can be known, he can only be believed.
Kierkegaard contends that God is truth and directly transmits his truth to the individual. The crowd, however, acts as a mediator between man and God. Separating the direct communication of God to the individual, the crowd eliminates the truth that it attempts to independently communicate by eliminating direct communication from God. In the absence of truth, illusion exists. Replacing God's direct word and truth with the promotion of irresponsible demoralization, the crowd endorses an illusion of truth. Value placed by the crowd on power, influence, and mastery over men strengthens man's desire for earthly, material desires, rather than the achievement of divine and moral ideals. As the individual's anonymity merges into identity with the crowd, he becomes a passive, irresponsible actor in the crowd, while his sense of responsibility and morality dissipate into collective responsibility. Aspiring towards earthly aims and irresponsibly ignoring morality contribute to the crowd's illumination of deception, thus hindering of truth. In his book, The Present Moment, Kierkegaard exemplifies the church as a manifestation of the crowd contributing to deceit and illusion of the truth. He writes,
The worst of all is to satisfy a craving which has not yet made its appearance, to anticipate it, or worse still, by the help of stimulants to produce something which looks like a craving, which then is promptly satisfied. This is exactly what is being done in religion, where people are in very truth fooled out of the real meaning of life and helped to waste their lives. That is, in very truth, the effect of this whole machinery of a state church and 1,000 royal officials who, under the pretense of being spiritual guides for the people, trick them out of the highest thing in life, which is the solicitude about oneself, and the need which would surely of itself find a teacher or minister after its own mind. Whereas now this need does not arise at all, but on the contrary is forestalled by being satisfied long before it can arise.
Ultimately, the crowd enhances demoralization, irresponsibility, and illusion while simultaneously reducing the desire for searching inward. Because the crowd exemplifies illusion, the individual's internal search becomes increasingly necessary. Kierkegaard maintains that one attains truth only by simultaneously becoming and disengaging from what one is. First, inward reflection leads one towards God's truth, which is found by becoming an individual. Because only one attains the goal, the individual must live in isolation and have the courage to be weak and impotent next to the powerful and influential crowd. Next, one must concurrently recognize and detach from the toils of deceptive illusion by disengaging from what one is as a crowd member. The paradox of becoming and disengaging is then realized through the decision to acknowledge the objective uncertainty of God with faith in His truth. Nietzsche's method of discovering truth incorporates individual experience. Thus, the Kierkegaardian notion of the individual separating completely from the crowd. Society fears the individual's rational self-investigation and desire for independence. Evading individual desires and development, society praises collective activity that benefits the public. Nietzsche severs himself from Kierkegaard, however, by declaring the disadvantageousness of any consideration of God. Rather than ascending toward outside divine figure and seeking truth in God, one should descend deep into the self, reflecting instinctually. Nietzsche further develops Kierkegaard's emphasis on the individual and his inward reflection by adding the element of experience. Truth is discovered only through individual experience, which is the reason truth is found within oneself. Living dangerously through the experience of individual pursuit for personal knowledge is the real personal path toward truth. Nietzsche's Übermensch, or idealization of a Superman dangerously traveling upon a uniquely created path, parallels the Buddha. Ironically, Nietzsche and the Buddha lived relatively reversed lives. Nietzsche failed to reach his ultimate Übermensch ideal, while the Buddha awoke to true reality before sharing his experience in nirvana. The Buddha seems to characterize Nietzsche's Übermensch more than Nietzsche himself, as the Buddha left the crowds of both royalty and aesthetics, finding his own path toward truth through personal meditation. Because meditation and awareness force the individual to leave the illusion of the crowd, these techniques also guide an individual toward a personal experience of truth. Although the Buddhist perspective encourages leaving the crowd and creating one's own path, the great Buddhist thinker Nagarjuna indicates a more forgiving view of the crowd's existing truth. In his Two Truths doctrine, Nagarjuna suggests that truth can be found in both the ultimate truth revealed in selfless awareness through meditation and through the worldly conventional truth of the crowd. Although the ultimate truth is superior to conventional truth, it does not disprove the truth of the crowd. Conventional reality holds truth simply because man perceives it to be true. Nagarjuna acknowledges that certain people are not ready to solitarily discover truth and may need a crutch, such as religion, to support them through the journey toward truth. Further, as Nietzsche had dismissed religion as unnecessary, Nagarjuna lends a more forgiving view, suggesting that for certain people, their conventional truth found in religion is in fact necessary. In comparison, Nishitani, regarding his scrutiny of the crowd, sides with the existential view rather than the view of his native Buddhist philosophy. Resembling Kierkegaard's avoidance of the machine-like crowd, Nishitani urges man to leave the demoralizing scientific entity. He advances towards Nietzsche's devaluation of religion as the manifestation of the dehumanizing machine. Because Nishitani left his comfortable academic life in Japan to study among German philosophers during World War II, the context of his German experience may have affected his analysis of the crowd. Nishitani acknowledges the existential and Buddhist joint view of inward reflection and crowd separation, but found that Buddhists take one leap past existentialists. One awakens to truth through personal meditation achieved only through the great doubt and the great death. First, one must escape the non-doubtful crowd by doubting everything that he knows and is. Even the doubt itself must be doubted. Once the doubt reaches the deepest of depths, the great death of the ego occurs, awakening man to true reality. The existential views indicate similarities to Buddhism through the release of the division between the mind and the body, between the self and the universe. However, while Nietzsche and Kierkegaard used nihilism, or negation of the self, as the final step towards truth, Buddhists additionally transcend negation by absolutely breaking through self-attachment through sunyata. Although Kierkegaard and Nietzsche travel through nihility, they arrive at distinct endpoints just short of sunyata. Kierkegaard discusses nihility in terms of dread from the dizziness of freedom, from infinite possibility. The spirit alarms man as it reveals itself as a possibility. Because this possibility results in more possibility, dread arises as the man is further alarmed by the spirit's infinite freedom of being able. Kierkegaard contends that the reality of dread, rather than the logic of the crowd, provides truth. Dread acts as an intermediate determinant between the possibility and actuality, which the crowd assumes automatically results from the possible. Kierkegaard recognizes the bleakness of dread and suggests something greater, something divine, rescues man from the bottomless void of dread.
If a consciousness of the eternal were not implanted in man, if the basis of all that exists were but a confusedly fermenting element which, convulsed by obscure passions, produced all, both the great and the insignificant, if under everything there lay a bottomless void never to be filled, what else were life but despair? If it were thus, and if there were no sacred bonds between man and man, if eternal oblivion were ever greedily watching for its prey, and if there existed no power strong enough to wrest it from its clutches, how empty were life then, and how dismal.
Unlike most existentialists, Kierkegaard offers a glimmer of hope.
The invitation stands at the parting of the ways, where the road of sin turns away from the enclosure of innocence. Ah, come hither! Ye are so close to him. But a single step in the opposite direction, and ye are infinitely far from him. Very possibly ye do not yet stand in need of rest, nor grasp fully what that means, but still follow the invitation, so that he who invites may save you from a predicament out of which it is so difficult and dangerous to be saved, and so that, being saved, ye may stay with him who is a Saviour of all, likewise of innocence. For even if it were possible that innocence is found somewhere, and altogether pure, why should not innocence also need a Saviour to keep it safe from evil?
One must deepen inward reflection, realizing the dread by acknowledging the possibility of the contradiction to one's beliefs. The greater the objective uncertainty and absurdity, the greater faith an individual must hold. As one distances self further from the views of the logical crowd and the irresponsible flow of society, the more inward one travels to become what one already is, an individual. Nagarjuna would agree with Kierkegaard's statement, the maximum of understanding which could come in question is to understand that it cannot be understood. Nagarjuna further suggests that the infinite possibility results in liberation from the crutch of God rather than in dread necessitating the decision to turn toward a Godhead. Ultimately, Kierkegaard defends eternal truth and existence, while Nietzsche argues that man experiences the transcendence of his self-being through the abyss of nihility rather than through God. Nihility represents the ultimate logical conclusion of values and ideas. Nietzsche recognized that the realization of the falsity of Christian moral, worldly, and historical interpretation resulted in the opposing view that all is false and all lacks meaning. Nihilism solves the despair upon realizing the falsity of one's own values, as it forces the individual to discover the value placed upon one's prior values. Nietzsche references Schopenhauer's contention that one must investigate the distinction between real and apparent truths as a single human alone for oneself. Although man fears reflection and solitude, these methods are the only way to find truth. For that which one lacks experience, one has no ears. Only by experiencing the transcendence of himself, by standing outside the self, alone despairing in truth, does one actually achieve the Übermensch ideal state of higher being. As existence and non-existence simultaneously manifest in a thing, when placed in some thing called nothingness, the abyss of nihility stretches over the suspended existence. although the Übermensch is separate from the self, it manifests itself in a super-ego, because the self is confined by the self to the self, resulting in attachment to the self. Inevitably, nihility, like the self, remains attached to itself, and nihility is bound to nihility. Buddhists realize the attachment by taking the final leap beyond salvation and nihilism through shunyata. Nishitani suggests that the radicalization of emptiness, or shunyata, breaks through self-attachment found in the abyss of nihility, as nihility is attached to nihility itself. Self-attachment is also found in Kierkegaard's illustration of man's faith in God, as man maintains his attachment to the self and distinction between himself and the divine something other. The radicalization of emptiness allows the self to become manifest in its form of true suchness, but only in its absolute nothingness. The nothingness appears united with the being as its self-identity by emptying itself of the representation of some thing that is nothingness. Shunyata results in the nothingness that existentialists aim towards, but by releasing the very notion of the self, Shunyata goes beyond the depth of existential views. Neither Kierkegaard nor Nietzsche could ever quite achieve the true nothingness or emptiness of Shunyata, because neither man could ever truly release their perception of the self.